Good morning, everybody. So now we are having the general lecture of Commission F, Echoes of Science, Sound and Radio. I am Gargi Rakshit from India Meteorological Department. I am the early career representative of Commission F, and I would like to introduce our speaker, Professor Sana Salaus. Professor Sana Salaus is the Professor of Communication Engineering, Department of Engineering, Durham University, UK. She is the Director of the Center for Communication Systems at Durham University since 2003. She is one of the 4 members of the board of the International Union of Radio Science and is a UK delegate to the Study Group 3 of ITU, where she is also chair correspondence group of CG3K5 and a major contributor to the CG3K6. And it is responsible for the development of propagation model for different deployment scenarios. Professor Sana Salaus was elected as Vice Chair of the recently formed ETSI Tegahertz ISG Group. She is also the Editor-in-Chief of the Radio Science Journal and the author of the book on radio propagation and channel modeling. She contributed to several ITU recommendations, and with recent contribution being focused on propagation models for 5G, 6G radio network. So with this brief introduction, I would like to invite our speaker, Professor Sana Salaus, to deliver the general lecture of Commission F, Echoes of Sound and Radio. So,
thank you for the invitation, and I'm pleased to be here with you. My first slide, just shows some of the features of Durham if you've never been to it. We have a castle and we have a cathedral. And our students are lucky they live in the castle, some of them do. So I'll just give some background about sounders and radars and the echoes of sound, and then move on to what I do in terms of radio and look at some of the applications of radars and sounders. In particular, towards the final section, I will be focusing on our work for 5G and 6G radio propagation measurements. So the start off historically in terms of what sounders and radars are. A sounder, by definition, is a device that is used to determine the distance, and this started quite a long time ago in the early 17th century when sounding was used to measure the depth of the sea. So you just put a plummet and then get it up and measure the length of the rope. Then later on, people developed some further types of sounders. So in 1875, they used to be used for weather condition measurements, such as temperature, pressure, wind speed, and wind direction. And radiosones are usually referring to weather balloons. Of course, these days you get very compact weather stations and weather sounders, and this is an example of a fairly compact one, and they can go up to 300 gigahertz. If you attended the session in the morning on disaster management, there were lots of different types of weather stations that were presented. But these are meant to be very sensitive devices, and they are usually equipped with multiple receivers. So echo sounding, what do we mean by echo sounding? Basically, it is that you have an echo. So if I were speaking in a very large room, I would be hearing the echo of my sound. In electromagnetics, we are basically looking at a signal which is incident on a flat surface and is being reflected back to us. And this can happen for both sounds and electromagnetic waves. So the principle is basically the same when we try to measure these echoes. So echo sounding, it was in 1912 when Alexander Bim looked at, after the disaster of the Titanic, tried to see whether he could develop something to detect icebergs. And instead, he discovered echo sounding, which turned out to be quite a powerful tool for measuring the depth of the sea. A year later, he patented it, and then since then, there is echo sounding, which is used to measure the depth of the sea. So you send sound pulses from the surface or underneath it, and then you get the echoes and measure the depth of the sea. And this has been used since the middle of the 1920s. Of course, these days you can also, if you want, advance it a little bit more, so you can have high-resolution maps of seabeds, and you can use autonomous underwater multi-beam equipment, echo sounders, and then you can have also measure the direction. As we know, if you have multiple beams, you might be able to get the direction of the sea bed. For electromagnetic radars and sounders, we need to go back to Marconi. And in 1895, he established the low-frequency radio link over a few miles. And in 1897, 2 years later, he set up a link between the Isle of Wight and the tugboat. And in principle, that can be considered as the first mobile radio link, because a mobile link means that either the transmitter or the receiver are in motion, and because it was to a tugboat, then you can say it's mobile. And we see that was from the Isle of Wight. Marconi, of course, if you go to Bologna, you would be able to visit the Marconi Museum. But Marconi couldn't raise the money for his work in Italy, so his mother was Irish. So he came to the UK and managed to raise the money, and the Marconi company was in the UK for many years until it stopped a few years back. But in principle, Marconi sparked a great deal of interest among scientists and fortune hunters who wanted to use this new technology. Holzmeier in Germany in 1904, he demonstrated that you can also detect echoes of ships up to 3 kilometers. And this is the equipment that he used. It's a simple spark plug and a multi-pole antenna. And I'll just give a few examples of radar applications and some of the work that we have done as well at Durham. So sea-state radar, for those of you who work in sea-state radar, they know that these operate in the HF band, and they measure the Doppler shift, and the wavelength that you are transmitting is related to the wave heights. And Birmingham University, where I did my PhD, used to have a sea-state radar, and the waveform that they used is the frequency modulated waveform. But because you have co-located transmitter and receiver, it was called FMICW, a technique which we continue to use to this day in other applications of radars. So the one that we have at Durham, of course, HF radars are very challenging. As you saw, you would need a coastline and you need big antennas. And so the one that we have developed at Durham, I don't know if the pointer works or not, is this one here, which is an ultra-wideband radar. So it is looking at through-wall imaging. We used it for through-wall imaging. You can also use it for mine detection. And you can also try and measure what is called now micro-Doppler radar. So if there is somebody inside the room, you can also measure their mobility by measuring but because you want to get the signal through the wall, you need to ensure that the reflected signal from the wall is not overwhelming your received signal. And so you need to design the waveform in such a way that the reflection from the wall is actually attenuated. And that's what you do with the FMICW. you do a waveform which interrupts the signal so that the reflection, the nearby reflection is very low and you can go into the depth of the room. And we demonstrated this a few years back. You can also have radars that are used, of course, for aircraft detection. Now, how do you design radars and sounders? For me, they are both similar. They are the same device, really. It is just the way that you do the configuration. And you can have a monostatic radar, or you can have a bistatic radar. Bistatic means that the transmitter and the receiver are both stationary and they are separated. Whereas a monostatic, again, they are stationary, but they are physically co-located. You can also make several transmit and several receive antennas, and similarly, if you are working in communication systems, you might have come across MIMO, where you have multiple transmit, multiple receive antennas into the system, and the idea is that you would increase your data rate that way by orthogonality, or you could have also try to get direction of arrival, direction of departure information. The simplest one is the CISO, which means single input, single output, single antennas, or you can have multiple antennas at the receiver or multiple antennas at the transmitter. So it can be quite complex if you want to design a MIMO system, because you need to make sure that, especially for sounding, that you are able to distinguish the different transmit antennas and the different receive antennas. Sometimes people just have a single one and then they do rotation to get the MIMO effect. So for wireless communications, there are a number of things that you need to consider. So which frequency band are you targeting? Which type of environment you want to build your equipment for? I use these frequency divisions, which are the acceptable ones by the ITU. So, and they go by multiples of 10, so VLF 3 to 30 kilohertz, low frequency, and so on. And we are looking now up to the 300 gigahertz, so we are covering a very wide frequency range. So it depends on which environment. So if you're looking at the Earth's atmosphere, if that's what you are interested in, then you will be looking up. So you will have the troposphere, which is the lowest part of the Earth's atmosphere, and of course ionospheric propagation gives you long-range communication, which was the first form of long-range communication before satellites came in. And in the ionosphere, there are different layers. The D layer, which is actually attenuates your signal, and then you go up into the E layer and the F layer, and in the summer you might have what is called as sporadic E layers, which are just on the surface. For tropospheric propagation, what normally you can be looking at between 300 megahertz to 10 gigahertz, and these are called forward scatter, and they can give you long-range propagation. There were some attempts to use troposcatter, but they are actually fairly limited. Ionospheric propagation is the first long-range communication system, so you can set up a link over a very long range, and you have the multiple layers giving you multiple reflections. It's not the same now. Your mobile radio is fairly short range, and when you look at the echoes from the mobile radio, you're talking about nanoseconds or microseconds. When we're talking about ionospheric propagation, we're looking at milliseconds. And it also, depending on the weather conditions, it can enable you to go around the Earth. I'm showing you an example of some antennas that we have built for MIMO. For MIMO antennas. So these are MIMO antennas that we built. We had a project with Leicester University. Because MIMO, when it first came, it was meant for mobile radio, so you can have lots of antennas at the transmitter and lots of antennas at the receiver. They're small in size. But for ionospheric propagation, of course, the size of the antenna is proportional to the wavelength. And so you need to have fairly large antennas. But we managed to get some antennas designed for MIMO where you don't need a very big base station or a very large field, and you can make them orthogonal. And this was successful some years ago as well. My most recent work is focused on mobile radio sounders. So for mobile radio sounders, you have a wide range of universal radio communications. You have the satellite links, and you have also your usual aircraft, perhaps. We have transport, and you have dense urban environments, you have trains, and so on. So again, you need to consider the different mobile frequency bands. When people started building their mobile radio, they wanted to look at antenna design, so you want small antennas. You want to have range limited because you want to have frequency reuse, otherwise you will not have enough spectrum to provide the service. You also want to have adequate power generation for your RF devices. And another factor, which is now very important in 5G and 6G communication, is building entry loss or penetration into buildings. So if you want to have two-way communication in an urban environment, you want to be able to get the signal indoors. Otherwise, you will be having to go outdoor all the time, which is not feasible. And that's one of the reasons why sometimes you don't get a satellite signal. So the frequency bands that people have been working on in mobile radio, they are the UHF band, 300 megahertz to 3 gigahertz. These were the first generations. Then there are, of course, some above 3 gigahertz, 3 to 30 gigahertz, and now the millimeter wave band between 30 to 300 gigahertz, where people are looking at. So in between these, 5G came, and then also now we're working on 6G. And Claire gave an overview of the frequency bands now that the WRC is looking for the future. So for a mobile radio sounder, basically it's very simple. The principle, you transmit a very narrow pulse, and then you get lots of received multiple replicas. The scenarios can be quite varied, so you could be, for example, in an urban environment, and early mobile radio devices were basically vehicular. So you were looking at a vehicle because they were very large. But of course, now with time, we all have our mobiles and they are handheld. But there can be challenges. So the environment I'm showing in the lower figure here, this is like an industrial environment where you might have lots of reflectors and lots of challenges going up and down, metallic structures as well that can block your signal. I've been to some industrial locations where they couldn't even get the Wi-Fi all over the same floor, even though it was the same floor, because they had different metallic structures. So for that, you can again go back and say, what am I going to do? Do I want just a single transmitter and a single receiver? And you're just looking at the channel in between, how the signal is going to arrive to you. And if you wanted to build a MIMO sounder and you wanted it to be fast, then one possibility is to deploy multiple antennas at the transmitter with an RF switch that goes across all the transmit antennas sequentially. And at the receiver, you receive them in parallel. That means you have to build as many receivers as you want for antennas, which is quite a big job. But this is what we call semi-sequential MIMO sounder. And you just need to identify which antenna, so you might be able to put a gap in between. And indeed, we did build one, an 8x8 MIMO sounder for the 3G band. And you can see here that it was set up on a trolley for the receiver with directional antennas. You can also use omnidirectional antennas that you can put in a linear fashion, or you can put them around the circle, whichever way you are intending to do the measurements. And you would need a vehicle if you want to do vehicular measurements. So it can be quite a big system, as this one, that original one that we built for the 3G band, which was in the 2 gigahertz band. Then when you go out to do your measurements, you need to classify the environments, and there are outdoor environments, indoor environments, and so there are different classifications. You might be looking at rural type of environment, or you could be looking at urban. So if you go to Japan, you have lots of high-rise buildings, and the signal can be blocked. You would have high losses. Or if you are in an open space, then the signal can travel far. You can also have suburban environments where you have residential parks and gardens. The actual definitions of these various type of environments, you can find it in the ITUR 1411, which is the outdoor one. And this is an example to show that even if we wanted to collaborate and do propagation models across different countries, because that's how the ITU recommendations work. They're not just designed for the UK or Japan. And this is an example of the type of actual environment that you might be looking at. So on the top left here, that's actually Durham University. And this classifies as suburban in the ITU recommendations. Whereas when we look here, that's in Korea, that's supposed to be residential. But the definition of residential is more in line with what we have in the UK. So there are single-story buildings, single to 1 to 2-story buildings. And so even though the Korean environment was meant to be residential, we ended up combining it with our measurements from what we call suburban. So there are definitions for the different types of environments. Of course, the one in Japan is high-rise environment. Other types of environments that we measured, so this is what we have in the UK, that's Manchester city centre, where you have a different building heights. You can also go to a residential area and measure it, or you can go to an island and measure it. This was one of my research assistants at the time when they went to the Isle of Wight to do some measurements. Now, indoor scenarios are very varied, and people are looking at getting different. You're looking at now wearing your glasses and looking at these high-definition type of TV signals and different multiple signals. You can have it in a classroom. You can have it in an exhibition center on conference. Also in transport, they're looking at buses, inside trains and airplanes. We did do some measurements in Munich. They have a model aircraft. But another one, which actually, when we started looking at the millimeter wave, is for on-body networks. And that was meant to look at the 60 gigahertz, because the 60 gigahertz is a special frequency band. And the idea to see if you can have an on-body network for the dismounted soldier. Other indoor environments are the industrial environment, where you might have lots of metallic structures. You can have office environment, where you have desks and computers. You can have corridors. And we also were lucky that we were able to go to the BBC studios. So that's a TV studio that we were able to measure in the lower frequency bands at the time. So now we moved up in frequency because people said, okay, there's a lot of demand for mobile radio networks, and we want to have lots of frequency bands, and they moved up in frequency for 5G and 6G. Since our contribution ends up in the ITU, we're always looking at what the WRC frequency bands that are identified. The WRC meets once every 4 years, and in 2015 they met and they identified lots of frequency bands. So it was a big challenge. You needed to cover between 24 gigahertz. Oops, sorry, it moved by itself. You needed to do this between 24 gigahertz to 86 gigahertz. And the ones in red are the ones that we managed to get RF heads for. So there are challenges, of course. We have to do multi-band measurements. We needed to do wide bandwidth. We needed to be able to program the bandwidth and the carrier. We also needed to have multiple transmit, multiple receive if we wanted to study the impact of polarization. So at least you needed to have 2 by 2. Then we also needed to have high Doppler rate. If we wanted to measure high Doppler rate, you needed to, depends on the speed and also on the frequency. So I'm giving an example here of how many sweeps per second you need in order to cover 22 kilometers per hour at 60 gigahertz. You also need to have high dynamic range and low distortion of your waveform, because the wider the bandwidth, the more you are likely to have a distorted spectrum or a distorted pulse, depending on the type of transmission that you are doing. And you need to have bandwidth compression. So if you have 5 gigahertz of bandwidth, you want to be able to digitize the received signal. So you need bandwidth compression. And there are already established mechanisms for bandwidth compression. And so what we did, the first one that we did for chirp channel sounding, we decided that, okay, it is now normally we're looking at the higher frequencies, but since we are building an entirely new channel sounder, we thought it is best to make it multiple bands, so we didn't want just to cover the high frequencies. So we ended up with a sounder that covers multiple bands from 0.25 to 1 gigahertz, the baseband, which is a digital synthesizer. And the next IF, 2.2 to 2.9, we made sure that we avoided the 3G band. And the second IF was 4.4 to 5.9. You can see the bandwidth has increased by twice. So it went from 750 megahertz bandwidth to 1.5. And then we have another IF stage, which is programmable. And then it is this IF stage that we have built, which we can just change the phase locked loop frequency, and then it will give us the output after that at 1.5 from 12.5 gigahertz to 18 gigahertz. So that means that we can then use the different RF heads to go to the frequency bands of interest. And we also said at least we wanted to have 2 by 2, so all of our RF heads have 2 by 2. In the 28 gigahertz, we have 8 by 8. But for the other frequency bands, mostly 2 by 2. So when we go up in frequency, we use frequency multipliers. So in the 25 to 30 gigahertz, we can cover 3 gigahertz of bandwidth. Then it goes to 4.5, then 6 and 9. And now in the new RF heads, we can go to 18 and 36 gigahertz of bandwidth. But these bandwidths are not the bandwidths that people are going actually to use for the radio communication systems. So although we can do these wide bandwidths, we normally process the data with a lower bandwidth. And that's the system that we have now, the new sounder that we have, which we are using all the time. And this one shows you that actually the biggest unit in the sounder is the rubidium standard, because we need to lock everything from the rubidium standard. And this one in the middle is the baseband plus the first IF, and the second one has two of them. Sorry, this is moving by itself. And then it goes on the trolley, and all the RF heads are portable, so these are very small ones. And these have 2 by 2. You can see there are 2 antennas, horn antennas on the device. And these were the first ones that we built for the on-body networks between 50 to 75 gigahertz. You can also do 2 bands because we also have an RF switch at the IF, and that means we can drive at least 2 RF heads at the same time. And that was quite useful when we did lots and lots of measurements to get the models into the ITU for both the indoor and the outdoor across multiple frequency bands. Then there is, of course, the issue of how you do these measurements. So one possibility is to do directional and then to synthesize the omni. And with the directional measurements, you have, very nice, you can see the actual signal where it is coming from, and if you estimate the power, you can see also the angle where it is coming from. But for path loss models, it means you end up with only a few data points because each location takes a very long time to rotate the antenna. And so when we tried to contribute these to the ITU model, it was agreed that we should do omni to omni. And you can see the difference with the omni to omni. Now you have a very large number of data points. You can measure lots of data points on the move as well. So from the modeling point of view, it depends on the information that you're looking for. If you want to know where the signal is arriving from, you can use the directional and synthesize the omni. Or if you wanted to have lots of data points, then you would do the omni to omni. And I'm giving you an example of the path loss model that we did. And this was for the residential environment that I showed you in Durham. And because we have the multi-band sounder, we were able to do measurements across multiple bands. So we could derive for our sounder on its own what is called as the alpha beta gamma model, which is basically giving you the coefficients as a function of distance and as a function of frequency. And this model is included in the ITU because so far we were the only contributors for the residential model. After all of those measurements across all those bands, the WRC met in 2019 and they only approved these bands. So these are all the green ones that eventually were approved, and there were 17.25 gigahertz approved for IMT, and previously it was 1.9 available before WRC 19. Of course, each country then can decide which bits of the spectrum they want to use, but there was about 14.75 gigahertz of harmonization worldwide. Then we moved to 6G bands, and in the 6G we are looking now at 30 to 300 gigahertz. But now you need to worry about oxygen absorption at 60, which is the highest. But now we're looking even at higher frequency bands. So you have the oxygen peaks at 60 and 118. Then you also have water vapor peaks at 184 and 325. And some of the frequencies that we are looking at now are the 140 to 170 gigahertz, and then 235 to 300 gigahertz. Again, the challenge is how you do these measurements, whether you do directional measurements or whether you do omnidirectional. There are no omni antennas in the 300 gigahertz band. At least there are no commercial antennas. So far we have been doing directional to directional in the 300, but in the 140 we do have one omni and we have a directional, which means we can do a little bit faster. The other thing that you need to worry about when you go to these higher frequency bands is the impact of precipitation. So when it rains, you can have scattering, and it depends on the relationship between the drop size and the wavelength. You can have either Rayleigh scattering or you can have Mie scattering. This is also very difficult to measure, but we have set up at Durham a weather station, and our weather station is an optical one. It gives us 300 data points, and it gives us all the details of the drop size distribution, the rainfall rate, and the snow, and it classifies whether it's snowflakes and so on. And that was quite a good choice at the time, because most of the impact of precipitation was evaluated using rain gauges, which only give you the rainfall rate. But if you're going up in frequency, you need to measure the drop size distribution. We set it up for dual polarizations. So we have 2 frequency bands at the time. Now this has been upgraded, so we're still working on it. But this was for 28 gigahertz and 77 gigahertz. And we have 2 transmit, 2 receive for each one. And there's an example there showing you the impact of precipitation. When it rains, the signal drops based on the rainfall rate. And this was for the E band, so we also measured the copolarized and the cross-polarized attenuation. So this is one of the things that you need to worry about at these bands, but you don't need to worry about beam forming and making sure that you do beam tracking, which is what you would do if you had mobile. So if you take the rain effect into account, you can include it in your link budget. We did mention building entry loss before. And when we worked in the millimeter wave band for the 5G, we wanted to look at the different types of buildings. In the UK, there is a site called the Building Research Establishment in Watford, and they have typical buildings that are based, of course, in the UK, so they are classified as traditional and modern build. And we did these measurements with the staff of Ofcom for the 28 gigahertz and the higher frequency bands. We also need to worry about clutter, and clutter in type of communication means there are buildings in between the transmitter and the receiver, and this we did in JRC in Italy, where we set up the transmitter at one point. Oops, sorry, I'm hitting both of them at the same time. And you can put the receiver into another location where there is blockage, and you can also measure the building. So we did both clutter loss alone and building loss alone, and we also did combined building and clutter loss. The ITU came up with a new recommendation for building entry loss. I think it's 2109. So now we are working on the higher frequency bands for 6G, and this is an example of a measurement that we did at 145 gigahertz. And I'm showing you the environments that we are measuring, so you can measure an indoor environment, and normally we put the transmitter at the typical height of the access point, so as close as possible to the ceiling. Most access points are at that height, and then we measure the received signal at the height of the user. And we did this both indoor and outdoor. So because, as I said, it is a challenge to get omni-to-omni directional antennas, the receiver was an omni antenna and the transmitter was directional. So what you can see here is the impact of the rotation. the received signal as you rotate the antenna. Then you can synthesize the Omni and you can estimate the path loss and you can derive a model for it. But again, this is showing you in the outdoor environment how the received signal strength is changing as you are moving away from the transmitter, and the distance cannot be that far in these higher frequency bands. The link budget is very limited. In our case, we have 16 dBm at the output of the transmitter, and we also have a low noise amplifier when we do the non-line of sight measurements. In the 300 gigahertz, there are no LNAs, and you have very limited output power. The power that we have is about 5 dBm. So when you want to do propagation models, this is the model for the corridor type of environment in the non-line of sight. And what I'm showing you is that you can derive a model that goes from 0.6 gigahertz, which is the frequency band that we can measure, up to 159. The 159 gigahertz comes from Korea. And these are some of the model parameters that we are working on now. The models have not yet been updated in the ITU because the last recommendation, this is for the indoor environment, was updated last year. So we have to wait another year, but we have done measurements up to 300 gigahertz. Only line of sight up to 300. Non-line of sight, we stop at 159. Something else you need to worry about when you go to these high frequencies is human blockage. And this is actually what you're seeing here is that's the new device, the new setup for the weather measurements. So before we put it on the roof, we thought we could use it to study the impact on human blockage, what happens when somebody passes by between the transmitter and the receiver. And this new setup goes 28, 77, and 145 gigahertz. So you're seeing the measurement, the loss, the drop in the received signal strength. So you're looking at nearly 35 to 40 dB loss in the received signal strength. And we had several people pass by, interrupted, because you have one person, they'll give you one answer, and if you wanted to do some modeling and give the users some values, you need more than one person, so we had a number of people pass by. And for the 3 frequency bands, we generated the CDFs for the losses, and you can see you have the increase with frequency, about 1 to 2 dB as a function of frequency, both for the median value and for the 90% value. Then we looked at the modeling of human blockage, and there are already established models, so it's not our models. We just tried to see our measurements and compare them with the existing models. And you can see that the models, none of them actually fits the measurements, so it's a bit of a challenge. The ITU have a model, and they suggested that we try it, and it's actually very far away from the measurements. The METIS model, which was developed under an EU project called METIS, also is nowhere near the measurements. But the knife edge diffraction and geometric diffraction, some of them are coming close, but not quite the same. And when we looked at it a little bit more in detail, these models are meant for CW. So you just put a single frequency into the model. But the purpose of going to these higher frequencies is that you really want wideband, you want high data rates. So there's no point in using a CW model. And we did wideband measurements, and then we had to bring down the resolution of our measurements very low, as close as possible to CW, in order to compare it with the models. So that's something we thought then perhaps we should look at empirical modeling. And so we put from the top, we went down by 3 dB, then by 10 dB and 20 dB, and we estimated the parameters. So we see that for the 90% value, we are not getting anywhere near what we are getting from the measurements. Again, the measurements are giving us higher values. So the measurements for the 3 dB down 38, 39, and 40, whereas some of the models miss the 20 dB down completely, and the other models that do go below are also like 10 dB out. So perhaps the way to go forward with suggesting human blockage is to look at empirical modeling rather than these theoretical models. So at the moment we're working in study group 3 to develop models, and we're also working with ETSI. ETSI has a new group for the terahertz, and we're looking at frequencies above 100. It calls it terahertz, but it's strictly speaking millimeter wave. And there is another ETSI group which is looking at integrated communications and sensing, because the sounder is also a radar, so it can be used for sensing. And if you are interested in contributing to the ITU models, these are the recommendations that might be of interest to you. There is 1411, which I said is for the outdoor propagation models. 1238 is for the indoor propagation models, so those scenarios that I presented. If you are interested, that's where you will be looking for. If you want to look at building material, because there is now quite a lot of work in ray tracing. And if you look on ITUR P2040, you will see that the values in the tables for the electrical properties stop at 100 gigahertz. But people are doing ray tracing for the higher frequency bands, and there are no values. And so they're using the 100 gigahertz, which may or may not be accurate. So if this is something that you are working on, it would be good to look at 2040 and how to increase it. The impact of rain is in ITUR P530, where we said that we removed the restriction on the range factor. Building entry loss, 2109, and clutter loss, 2108. And if you are interested in working on human blockage, because I did see some presentations here on human blockage, then there is a new correspondence group which I'm chairing, and so you can get in touch with me if you would like to make a contribution. And so I'd like to conclude my talk that radars and sounders, as far as we have been working on, use similar waveforms. Perhaps for radars you might need to do some modification for the waveform to avoid reflection of strong reflections from close by objects. But you can use the technology to detect echoes, whether this is you have a sound wave or you have an electromagnetic waves. And they are basically used for many applications since the introduction of the technology and the techniques of echo detection. And you need sounders all the time, and you need to upgrade them all the time. So that's what we have been doing over the many years, from HF to terahertz now. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Professor Sana Salaus, for this very informative presentation on echoes of sound and radio. So we are enlightened with very exhaustive information related to this topic. So now the talk is open for questions and queries, if any.
Thank you very much. I would like to know if there are some program to consider to upgrade the ground conductivity, taking into account the cities that are in particular, we're interested by VLF propagation, and VLF is very dependent on the ground conductivity, and you got a big city in the middle of that path. This may change the propagation of the wave, and for the moment the maps doesn't take into account the cities. Are you aware of any program that would upgrade these maps of connectivity?
I don't know, maybe Claire knows. We're not really focusing so much on this now. But one of the things that are important is actually ground penetrating radar, because this is something that people are worried about for, in disaster areas. But I'm not aware of that work, sorry.
I got another question which is not related. Does the wind turbine have some impact, the Ariane system have an impact on the wave propagation?
Sorry, what does the
wind turbine?
Wind turbines. Yeah. Yes. I think we did try to do some modeling of wind turbines because they can interrupt the wave and they can also cause Doppler. We did do a small project, but we haven't come to a final conclusion on it. But yes, it is one of the issues, yeah.
Any more questions? This way.
First of all, thank you, Sana, for the nice presentation. I just wonder if you can say something more on the models you use for propagation at the higher frequencies. I'm talking about essentially ray models. How many contributions are needed to have a real prediction of the field?
Okay, so some of the things for rain that you can make a contribution for if you have long-term rain data, there is a data bank whereby you can make that contribution, because we heard about AI machine learning, and if you have lots of data, statistical data of rainfall rate and the drop size distribution, there are some like 3 or 4 tables that are standardized for those contributions, and they go into the data bank. So this is something I would encourage people to contribute to if they have weather data. We have contributed 4 years of weather data, but the data needs to be in a particular format, so depending on the equipment that you have to measure the rainfall rate. So there's rainfall rate, drop size distribution, and there are basically 3, and you have to give the geographic location of the measurements. Because when we are measuring our data, it is localized. But if you want to design mobile radio networks, you need more global data. You need to understand, not to design it just for the UK, you want to design it for Italy, for Spain, for North America, South America, so you need to have information about rainfall rate and the statistics of weather. The model that we contributed to the ITU, I did not present it here, but there is a model in ITUR recommendations, which is just giving you the attenuation with respect to the rainfall rate. And it gives you the numbers that you can put into the equations. But we found that actually maybe we should be looking at another model, which is looking at the drop size distribution and the drop size value. So far, the ITU recommendation hasn't changed to include that model. But perhaps when we have new results with the 145 gigahertz band, we would be able to revisit those models and update them. But the ITU model is standard. We did publish a paper about 3 years ago, in the IEEE axis, and that shows you the two models, the ITU model and the drop size distribution model, which gives more accurate, closer to the measurements.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
Connected to this one, about the model, you showed some of the measurements, scatter dots, and then the model which went there, and then you talked something about the alpha, beta, gamma, delta model. So to me it looked that there was just a straight lobe. Why not only one parameter to give me the
here?
like
Okay.
for example here. It
So
seems
this,
that in different frequencies you have the same.
yeah, it is because this model is applied to all the frequency data. So you take all the measurements that you have. So you estimate from these measurements were across multiple frequency bands. You can see the number of frequency bands. There's a very large number. And these data did not just come from Durham. We provided 9 frequency bands, but there were some others from Korea and probably from Japan that made contributions. And then we combined all the data and tried to estimate from all the data the parameters alpha, which is a function of distance, and then you have gamma, which is a function of frequency, and beta is just this point. And then for each frequency, you implement those and you would get the fit. Now, I think that we need to revisit these models because some of the data that you can see are not covering the entire distance. And so we need to check whether these data, whether these models and these coefficients are actually a good representation of the data. I'm not presenting the outdoor. The outdoor is even more stark than this. In the outdoor, the measurements were done in Japan. And in Japan, they did long range because they had high power, so they could go up to 600 meters in the lower frequency bands. But when it came to the 39 gigahertz, they could only go up to 200 meters. So then if you make a model and you say this model is actually valid up to 600 meters, it's not a good representation. So we need to split the frequency bands. And that's what I'm proposing for the ITU meeting next week, that we split the frequency bands, yeah.
But if I think about like a free space propagation, if I go 10 times more, it is like 20 dB loss. And I think this is about the same, even if it is non-line of sight. So I would have expected that there is a frequency, different slopes for different frequencies.
Well, there is actually, they're not fitting. The value of sigma is very high. So sigma is 7.58. If the fit was more closer to the measurements, then you would get a lower value of sigma. So the value of sigma indicates that the model fit has a high variation with respect to the data. Yeah.
I have a curiosity related to this. So while estimating this basic transmission loss, the rain is considered uniform along the path?
No, these are indoor, so there is no rain.
Okay.
But for the outdoor measurements, generally the measurements we perform them during good weather conditions because we can't take the sounder under rain. The rain is studied separately.
Okay. Next question. If any more questions?
I think it's time.
If no, I have a small curiosity that you showed one C-static radar that it senses the Doppler velocity, that is the movement of the waves. So if there is any propagating weather phenomena, it is like it is supposed to impact?
Yeah, the waves would change, the height of the waves would change.
Okay, so in between...
But in Doppler, Doppler is mobility.
Yes.
So if something is on the move, that's when you get Doppler shift.
Yes, but weather phenomena which is moving, like any cyclonic activities or any weather phenomena which is moving. So it is supposed to impact that Doppler velocity which is sensed by that sea static radar, if it is within that sensing range, in between that.
If there is, yes, it would impact.
Okay, so in that case it will not accurately.
I mean, the Doppler can be either a Doppler peak or it could be a Doppler spread.
Okay.
So if it is a peak, then you know that it is just a single thing that is coming back. But it could be, I didn't show Doppler spread. But when you have lots of reflections, you will get a Doppler spread. It won't be a single peak in the Doppler domain.
Okay.
And the models that, for example, for mobile radio, assume you have a large number of reflectors
Yes.
coming in. So.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions? If no, let's close the session. I would again like to thank Professor Sana Salaus for this wonderful lecture.